Um, Kind of with democracies, shifting gears slightly. Now that we have a bit of sense of why we have a democracy, um, we're going to look a little deeper into democracies as a
Yes.
whole.
And
So,
I think,
oh
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, you have something.
Actually, because I was because just to answer, like, do they achieve their purpose? And I
Yep.
think to look at it in a modern, we need to look at it mostly in a modern context, because what we were just saying
Yes.
is there's so many factors, and I think one of the biggest ones is individualism, because that is really in the last, I guess, 100 years is really like the idea of the individual is the driving machine of like what makes America great and like what made the West great or like strong in the beginning of the 20th century in that sense. But it's also how can the reinforcement of individualism become a double-edged sword to the democratic process is really what I'd like to point out. Because
Okay.
individualism, of course, is the idea that it's okay to be yourself, and the goal behind individualism was to get societies to a place where they can be united while accepting that everyone is unique in their own way. And obviously, this is great. This is a thing society. It's a great thing for societies to be more inclusive. However, in the promotion of individualism as a way to unite people, we've also seen it cause a divide because we've reinforced the idea of individualism so much to the point that it's the needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many in our society at the moment, instead of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Like, sorry for crappy quote. I couldn't think of a better one. But that's where we've reinforced the idea of like, well, yeah, Jeff Bezos has made $140 billion in 28 months, and there are people that are like, yeah, he's just earned every penny of that, and it's like, well, shouldn't someone like that be taxed? And that's still obviously a bigger question for later, but it's one of those things where we've cemented individuals to the point where people support the accusation of so much wealth to be hoarded that it's okay.
Yeah, and I think even kind of connected with that, because obviously, for from a democratic standpoint, economics is uh, connected, but it is like you had mentioned, a whole other
Yeah,
bag to
yeah,
go down and
yeah. It's a
and
whole different
unpack. But
can of worms.
um, the idea that in a democracy they're promoting this idea of freedom, right, and this idea of choice. So
Yeah,
that translates to just about every aspect of society, right? What do you like? How do you want to act in life, right? What do you want to do for work? What are the clothes you like? What do you
your
like to
social
eat?
activities. Yeah,
Yeah, your social activities, your preferences, all those things. It's the freedom to be able to choose those things. And I think you were already touching upon this, but the way that that affects democracies is that in a democracy, we're trying to have a situation where the closest thing to a majority opinion on something is the way that society is going to function, right? The
yeah,
majority of us think it's wrong to kill someone. So we've deemed it that in our laws, that is the way that we're going to live society. There may be some people out there that feel otherwise, but they are the minority, and therefore that decision is not weighted the same as the majority, right?
majorities. Yeah,
And that individualism aspect that you were talking about, it translates to just about every aspect of society. And so when you're trying to have a democracy in how you decide on a given law, right? And we see it all the time. Uh, Not to get into this, but the conversation around abortion,
I was
right?
just, yeah,
Yeah,
you took the words out of my mouth.
yeah.
Yeah, I was like,
I
I don't want
think
to get
there's
into it, but it's a great example.
yeah, yeah. I don't think that there is a country in this world that doesn't struggle with that conversation,
Yeah, yeah. Every
because
first
there's a
world
lot.
country. Yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot of differing views on how we approach that, and that individualism aspect makes it very difficult for us all to kind of come on the same page, and
come to
that
a
can be
consensus.
translated to just about, yeah, consensus, correct, right? Like and that can be translated to just about every topic that we talk about, right? It doesn't have to be something as polarizing as abortion, but
Portion.
Like you
Yeah,
mentioned taxes, you
it can come down to a
mentioned
simple yes or no with a vote. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, should
Yeah,
we pay for healthcare, all
and you
those
can
kind of
still
things.
have a million different opinions
Mhm.
on
Exactly.
top of that.
Yeah. And I think kind of going off of that, right? And I don't know if you want to kind of take it away with this, but I think that's where the importance of education kind of comes into play,
Yeah.
right? Like because it's
Yes.
that idea, if we're all individuals, but yet if we have a same understanding, I might individually still come to that same conclusion
Inclusion. Yeah.
potentially. But yeah, I don't know if you
Well,
want to kind of
to your point is you and I were able to vote when we turned 18. And I can safely say that I didn't have a full understanding of how our political system worked until maybe after maybe I don't know, second round of exams in second year of university where it's like, okay, now this is all kind of making sense to me.
yeah.
But even then, it was still kind of like I'm like, I hope I got this right.
That's a very like fair point in terms of like the actual system, right?
Yeah, because there's still times I'm like, I'm pretty sure like I nailed that paper, but there's parts of it where I'm like, oh, don't drop all my grades because of that one time, like one
Yeah.
part. Like,
Well, that's actually a really interesting point in the sense of I don't know about you, but if I think back to my high school career, I don't know if there was a lot of times where we really kind of talked about how
yeah, I
our
don't.
electoral systems and how our governments function, right?
I
And I
had
think that
maybe
that can be
two. Yeah, like I'm trying to
that would
think of like two teachers that brushed on it, but
yeah,
like
probably.
when you think about how intricate the system is,
Mhm.
I think
100%.
yeah, we're not exposed to the sensitivity of that at like a young enough age to realize it by the time we're able to make those decisions and therein for turn affect society
Yeah.
with those decisions because it's we happened here I guess when Trudeau won his majority like highest voter turnout for youth ever and one of the platforms he was running on was to legalize pot
Yeah, legalize cannabis, yeah.
and if I was 18 at the time yeah, I would have been that would have been the main reason I would have been standing in a voting line,
Yeah.
like, to be honest, but
Yeah,
I
it's the
yeah,
simple
wish I
candy
was
that
18, but nah, I can't even lie. Yeah, we can't
uh,
pretend.
yeah. But it's a good point that there's two kind of sides I think to education, right? There is one, do you understand the system and how that functions? So I think for a lot of us, we don't necessarily. And even those who do, I think it really comes down to what types of courses or things you are choosing to learn about, right?
Learn
So
about yeah.
you may have taken, like I'm sure knowing what I took in high school, that I probably did have some courses that talked about um, our election systems and
Yes,
how
yeah, I
Canadian
remember
politics.
very yeah.
Yeah. But I know I have tons of friends that would never have had a single conversation about that through their entire high school career.
Mhm.
And going further, right? University and
Yeah.
like any kind of post secondary education. So there is that side of things that hopefully after the end of this episode, you'll have a better idea of how democracies, just as a whole, maybe not necessarily specifically the
S
Canadian democracy,
yeah, specific
um,
types, yeah.
yeah, but as a whole, how democracies work. And then there's the other kind of flip side of education that really comes down to, um, and I would make the argument that may even have a bigger impact on democracies as a whole, is how do we educate societies in general on topics, right? So we had
Mhm.
already talked about things like taxes. We had talked about things like abortion. We've talked about things like healthcare, right? Just to name like a few things that I know a lot of people battle and have lots of conversations and dialogue on. But how we approach educating society, and if we even educate society on these things, plays a huge role on how democracies function, right?
Yeah.
That idea that if we don't understand, like, let's say, tax laws, right? It's hard for people to vote on those things if we don't truly understand it. And if they don't truly understand it, you also leave the room for manipulation, right?
Yeah, and that kinda comes back up to what I was mentioning earlier was another part of that is when we started taking those courses in post secondary, the first thing I realized is, wow, I don't know much about my governance system. I'm learning about it now.
It's so fair, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is that kind of blew me away. I was like, I thought I knew this stuff,
Yeah.
but I didn't. I guess I didn't.
It, and I feel like that's like both a interesting but also a scary point in some ways because one, we were lucky. I guess lucky might not be always the term, but we chose to take courses that focused on those things. But you had already
Yeah.
mentioned, for instance, when you turn 18 now, obviously it depends on when an election happens, right? But to think that you can go through all of high school and that's pretty much when you turn 18, right?
Yeah.
um,
By the end of it.
or
Yeah.
once you graduate high school, you're that following school year, you're turning 18. So that's potentially your first election that you may be a part of, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that you yourself said it wasn't until second year, aka you were
Yeah, I would if I
19,
could go
20
back
years old.
now, yeah, I'd tell you that don't let 18-year-old Jordan vote. He doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah,
Sit him
right.
down and have a talk with him.
Yeah, yeah, right. And that kind
He's
of, I
full
guess,
of vim
comes
and
back.
vinegar. Yeah.
Yeah, comes back to that individualism stuff that you were talking about earlier, in that as an individual you could choose not to learn about these things,
Yes.
but yet as an individual you also have the right to vote.
And that's,
um
I think, too, what you were trying to get to is that the education system doesn't teach you to, I don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it's critically think.
yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I know that we're not going to delve
Yeah,
too
I don't
deep
want to
on
get
that
too
right
deep
now,
into it,
but
but in a sense where we go to school from grade 6 years old to about 18, and you're taught to read out of a book and then put those answers onto a test.
hmm
And
yeah,
that is if you can regurgitate that information correctly, you've done good.
yeah. And then it goes a step further, like we already talked. If you were never given that book in the first place to regurgitate on a test,
Then
you
you're
really
missing
have
out on,
nothing. Yeah,
yeah,
to go off of.
on
Yeah.
that whole subject. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is those two aspects of individualism and education are kind of make it or break it when it comes to a democracy, right?
Yeah.
And I think you hit like really great points, like the idea of critical thinking when it comes to education, this desire to choose something for yourself rather than for the greater collective, which obviously in a democracy you're looking at the collective, but
Yes. Yeah.
it's very counterintuitive to this idea of human rights and freedom and um, individualism that kind of come out of democracies kind of naturally, right?
How it
The
all kind of,
ability to choose.
yeah,
Yeah,
brews together into this confusion soup.
they kind of they kind of in a way conflict with each other,
Hmm.
right? It's hard to be like group mentality but yet we're also going to like think individually.
Yeah.
um but yeah, so I think it's so important to understand those two aspects of it, and in particular we see that when we look at elections, right? So